Hey, it's Brennan. I'm back. And today, I'm here to talk about a game that came out in 2017, but has a lot of links to a lot of modern day gaming, and in my opinion, kinda set the stage for some of the games that we're seeing come out now. Obviously, especially the other games that are within its own franchise. And that game is Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. So, I'll give you a breakdown of the story so that you know who I'm talking about roughly, if you haven't played it in a while, or if you don't know the story at all. Then, after I've broken down the story, I'll get into a bit more of the actual analysis portion. So, let's begin. We start the game off with a somewhat uncanny valley cutscene that is Mia. Mia is explaining to Ethan about how she really misses him and she wants to come back very soon, hopefully. We then cut to her recording a video message, which then seems to show the opposite, that in fact she's telling Ethan to stay away and something is very wrong. Great cliffhanger opening, very en medias res, starting off in the middle of something and makes you want to know what's coming next. So, then we cut to Ethan 3 years later, driving to the bayou in the middle of Louisiana to then find his wife, Mia, somewhere out there, because suddenly he received contact from her. We then hop out the car as Ethan, begin to explore around a little bit, and we come across a few very odd things. A lot of dead things. Then Ethan makes his way into the Baker family home, or at least the guest house portion of it. We then come across a great number of very odd, very concerning things, before we then come across Mia. Mia is dazed, confused, and very concerned for Ethan's safety, before she is then seemingly kidnapped again. It turns out she has not been kidnapped, but instead she seems to be some sort of possessed or infected with something. Now, if you know the Resident Evil franchise, you'll know she's definitely infected with something, and we don't know what at this stage. However, after a very violent encounter and seemingly killing Mia, we then get a phone call from someone who identifies himself as Zoe. Zoe will come back in later on in the story, but for now, we head back over, Mia is gone, which is very ominous, and then we head into the next portion. Getting our hand cut off. Great. After getting our hands cut off with a damn chainsaw, we then head up to the first boss of the game, which is really more of a mini-boss, but whatever. We kill Mia before we are then stomped in the head by Jack. Now, this is our first proper encounter seeing Jack, and things will get crazier as they go on. We then come into one of the most iconic, brutal, and disgusting cutscenes that we've seen in modern gaming, the infamous dinner table scene. Here, Ethan is then introduced to a few new things, and a few new people, that being the rest of the Baker family, apart from Zoe. So, we get to see the lovely, colourful characters of Jack, Marguerite, Lucas, and the very oddly quiet grandmother, whose name we never learn. Ethan isn't in the best shape, but after escaping from this dinner table, after a little fight amongst the family, we then explore around a bit, before we then come across Jack again, this time as a stalker-type enemy. Now, I'll get more once again into the analysis portion later, but for now let's continue with the story, where we then make our way over and a police officer offers to help Ethan. However, he only gives him a pocket knife, and unfortunately meets his end very, very quickly. So, kind of an in-and-out character, you could say.
Hey, put that door back! Put that door back! Wait!
After a small mini-boss fight in the garage, then Ethan makes his way out and into the main house portion, where things start getting really interesting, and it starts feeling a bit more like classic Resident Evil. Here we explore the mansion. We find out from Zoe that there is a trailer outside. So after exploring the mansion for these 3 dog heads that we need to get there, we then head to the actual trailer. In the trailer, Zoe explains that there is something very strange occurring with her family, and Marguerite is just as bad as Jack. So, of course, after this little talk in the trailer, we then head out to the second main part of the Baker property, which is a very old, run-down swamp house. This section is very, very gross, full of bugs, and of course Marguerite herself. She's not as intimidating of a stalker enemy, but she definitely has her moments.
Where do you think you're going?
Stephen, please help me. Stephen, help me.
After securing everything we need to move on, we then go to a very small encounter with Marguerite, where we blast her a lot, and then she falls down into the pit and disappears in a big black glob. Then we head up to the door that she was guarding. This tells us that we need a particular serum to help Zoe and Mia, and this serum will help cure them of the fungus disease that is infecting the Baker family. A bit more of exploring the area, and we'll find that a lantern is necessary to move forward, head back, and that lantern that Marguerite was carrying is pulled away by her very, very elongated arm. And if you hurry down the hole fast enough, you'll actually see Marguerite crawl away. And this leads us to the grossest boss fight I have seen in any game in recent memory. Here you fight Marguerite in the greenhouse. And, like I said, it's a pretty gross boss. After killing Marguerite, we get what we need, this lantern to then go into this attic portion of the previous house that we were in. Now, in this house section, when we progress forward, we see that it's a child's room, but it's very dilapidated and contains some of the moulded enemies that we've come across previously. Hurry through this section, you'll grab the D-Series arm that you need, along with the D-Series head, and head back to the trailer, where you then find that Zoe has been kidnapped. She's not there waiting for you, and has instead been taken by her brother Lucas. Leads us on a bit more backtracking to get the keycards that we need to progress into Lucas's area. And this is where things get even more interesting. Lucas has set up a series of saw-like traps for us to then move through. After clearing all of Lucas's puzzles and enemy setups in the barn, we can then move into the little happy birthday trap room, clear that. We then move on to the backwater pier area, where we then come across the final sort of big boss of the game, and that is Jack Baker. Now, after clearing Jack Baker and using one of the very important cures on him, we then are given a choice. You have a choice between curing Zoe and curing Mia. So obviously after curing Mia, you then progress into Mia's section. Now in Mia's section, we get some important context that she's actually an Umbrella agent. And Umbrella having been evil in the previous games, this is quite an interesting turn, and she has actually been trying to contain and move safely the fungus infection that is infecting the Baker family, and it has now formed itself into the main antagonist, Evelyn. Evelyn has actually been going around infecting these people and giving them hallucinations because she has developed a subconscious and wants a family. In this case, she wants Mia and Ethan. After clearing the ship as Mia, switching back and forth between these flashbacks and current day, we then have Mia save Ethan and seemingly sacrifice herself, turning back into her demented form, before we then continue as Ethan. As Ethan, we go through the mines and back up to the house through a ton of enemies to finally confront Evelyn. And as Ethan finally destroys Evelyn, calcifying her body, we then see Chris Redfield come in with the rest of the Umbrella operatives to save him. Now, that seems like a happy ending. Until, of course, Resident Evil 8, but whatever. That's for another video. Now, let's move into the analysis portion. The first thing I want to talk about is the influences that have clearly gone into Resident Evil 7. So, the very obvious word that a lot of people come across when they are looking into Resident Evil 7 is grindhouse. So technically grindhouse means a specific type of movie theatre where they would run low-budget action and horror films. However, when most people hear grindhouse, they think of this specific horror subgenre, and that's most clearly defined by Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, this game clearly has a lot of references to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Big guy with a big weapon chasing a small guy with not very much. We also have a creepy little guy who runs around with like a knife and hurts himself. And they have traps set up around the property. And they live in a very small, isolated area. And they have a dinner scene. There's a lot of influence, clearly. And the final franchise that I think has a lot of influence on Resident Evil 7 is Saw. Saw is very well known for its torturous trap aspects, and that's very clearly what they were going for with Lucas's character. Now, everything I've listed here is only Western influences. There, of course, are going to be some Japanese influences, being as Capcom's a Japanese company, that I won't know. How the game explores horror is very interesting to me, and something that really made me love the game and is the reason I've played it through so many times. The first thing that I really love about Resident Evil 7 is something I mentioned in my Callisto Protocol video. Incredible environmental storytelling. Every single inch of the Baker family household and surrounding premises has something that contributes to the actual story development. From having pillows in just the right places to having toys in a kid's bedroom that feel like we can get a sense of the character that we're seeing. The little alligator toy that Lucas has in his bedroom is not only a sign of who he is, but also where he's grown up. Louisiana and the isolated nature of where their house is as much part of the story as it is defining to the aesthetic of the game. When it comes to exploring the horror, they also do it in a different way from classic horror. Resident Evil 8 explores the classic side of horror, but like I mentioned, Resident Evil 7 follows a lot more grindhouse and modern horror aspects. And that includes how they explore what horror is. In this game, we come across the fear of the unknown. The Baker family is very, very unpredictable. And even if you've played previous iterations of Resident Evil, the mutations and stages of mutations are very different. We're not dealing with the same virus we've had from the previous Resident Evil games. This is a fungus, and this fungus can grow in very different ways, causing very different enemies that we come across, and very different mental states to the people it infects. In Resident Evil 7, we're not just afraid of the fungus itself and these zombie enemies the same way we would be in The Last of Us or even in earlier iterations of Resident Evil. Instead, we're more afraid of how unpredictable and insane these family members are. Like I mentioned, there are a lot of modern horror aspects in this, and one of the ways they explore horror is with body horror. Of course, it's kind of a meme at this point. Ethan gets his hands destroyed every single time you turn a corner in this game. Ethan is getting his arms and hands wrecked. But the more important and more disgusting forms of body horror in this game are the mutations, and that's where it's more interesting. If you read through the notes that you come across within the game, you'll see the way that the Baker family creates the molded enemies you come across is by forcing them to ingest mold food, which then slowly turns their body into these writhing masses of mold. It's quite a disgusting process, and you see it firsthand with the Baker family themselves as they mutate, and especially Marguerite. And of course, the most important aspect when it comes to the whole game is the harsh, brutal nature of it. And in particular, one word that I want to use is grotesque. Now, there's entire books written on things like the word grotesque, which is a bit pretentious if you ask me, but it has an important meaning within the context of Resident Evil 7. The grotesque nature of things is not just about how gross something is. Blood and guts is gory and brutal, but it's not grotesque. The grotesque parts are the twisted parts, the things that make you question how a human could even come up with these ideas. Lucas, in particular, is very fascinating in this area, and we see that Lucas actually had some very violent psychopathic tendencies before he was infected, which then makes his infected nature far, far worse. We see cut-up animals and bits strung together, mechanical abominations of gears and saw blades and deer legs. It's disgusting. More importantly, though, it's grotesque, especially coming from the mind of someone who was, and in some ways still is, human. Now I want to go through each of the characters and sort of micro-analyze them and see these small areas and influences that really make them who they are. Now, Jack Baker is a pretty interesting character. He's both the Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees Leatherface, and yet also this southern guy who just has a nice family and wants to live his life out in peace. He's very likable, especially in this small hallucination stage when Ethan is waking up from the ship. But also, he's very intimidating. He's absolutely giant, as well as having a massive weapon and following you around wherever you go. Admittedly, the AI in this game is pretty primitive for their stalker enemy types, especially by comparison to Resident Evil 2, but the stalker nature of Jack Baker is still very impressive. Marguerite's character is also quite interesting. There's clearly a lot of influences pulled to make her character, but there's also some interesting franchises that have come out since that seem to have been inspired by similar things and show just how prevalent Marguerite's character type is. Marguerite is, of course, a loving mother, but also an insane mother when she's turned. And along with that, there's the obvious part of the body horror. Her body, when she turns into that lanky, weird thing, is so creepy, and actually seems to have taken a lot of influence from a lot of different areas. The immediate movies that come to mind for me are Wreck. It's a Spanish horror film where at the end we see the sort of sacrilegious zombie monster thing, and it's kind of similar where it has very long limbs, very contorted body proportions, and a very contorted face. However, there's another movie that's come out since RE7 that seems to have pulled similar influences, and that would be Smile. I don't know if any of you have seen Smile, but at the end we get this very long, lanky demon that is part of the curse, and it's very similar in stature to Marguerite's character. So you can see there is a lot of different franchises that put together this strange, lanky-limbed, very contorted body creature within their franchise. Zoe is an interesting character in the fact that she's not interesting. I find it very strange how they seem to have pulled from so many different places for all the other characters in the story, and yet Zoe is an outlier. You don't really see a lot of characters like Zoe in the same position, where she is infected but doesn't have a lot of the same mutations and mental problems that a lot of the other family members do when they're infected. Zoe is interesting because she's not like the others. She doesn't have something that makes her character super unique, which makes her unique. And final member of the main family, Lucas. Now, I've already talked a little bit about Lucas, but Lucas is interesting because he's kind of Jigsaw, but not. And there's kind of a lot of influence of like serial killers with the way he used to harm animals as a child, set fire to things, and possibly even killed his best friend. And then, now as an adult infected, he's very twisted, comes up with all these traps, like in Saw, but then his morality is not the same as Jigsaw. He's got that very twisted mindset of pleasure from harming others. That sort of Schadenfreude, but like times 100. Mia and Evelyn are kind of interesting because there's a sort of mother-daughter, but not really dynamic, and we don't really learn too much about Mia in this game in general. It's kind of strange how she's so background and yet so upfront, and Evelyn herself is sort of one-dimensional in a way. It's very much, she's come to life, she wants family. That's kind of it. We see that in a lot of franchises and various horror stories. Frankenstein wants to be human, but he knows he never can be. Evelyn knows she can never be human, but still wants a mother. And then we come to Ethan. So, I've heard some controversy online about Ethan's character, of how in Resident Evil 7 he's way too passive, and then in Resident Evil 8 he's not passive enough, but in my opinion, the stories are trying to do different things, and Resident Evil 7, they were trying to make him this silent protagonist, where you can be Ethan in his shoes. Of course, Ethan does speak, and he's not completely silent, but the point of his character is to lack a lot of personality so that you can put yourself in that position. The actual damage that's done to his body and the horrors that are popping directly into your face will be a lot more terrifying. Now, to sort of round off my analysis, let's talk a little bit about the context of the game and within the franchise itself. This game is interesting in the fact that it does away with a lot of the canon and the characters that come from the previous Resident Evil games. There's not a heavy emphasis on a secret laboratory, even though there is one, and there's not a heavy emphasis on zombie enemies, even though they are kind of zombies. It's taking a lot of the old and forming it into something that's unique and its own. They do, of course, bring in Chris Redfield and Umbrella and the BCAA and sort of tie things together, and within that DLC, Not a Hero, we do see more of that Resident Evil influence and a lot more action within it. However, it's a far cry from Resident Evil 6 and what that was. Clearly, with Resident Evil 7, they were trying to bring it back to its roots, but make it unique. Not just make it some agents running through a mansion, but instead make it an innocent guy who's just trying to get through his day, who's just trying to get his family back. And he does. He manages it. And that happy ending is something that is so rewarding at the end of a somewhat long and very difficult, arduous journey for Ethan. And quite a fun ride if you enjoy this type of horror and this type of game, me included. I've enjoyed the game so much, I played through it at least 7 or 8 times. I'm kind of losing count now, but I've done all sorts of like challenge runs and stuff with this game because there's so much you can do with it. It's a very interesting game because unlike some of the previous Resident Evil games, it's a simple premise. And sometimes simplicity is better than a lot of complexity. Brings you what you need in a very compact and form-fitting package. That is horror, grime, and grotesquity in its purest form. Thanks for watching the video, and if you liked it, give it a like. And if you want to see more of this stuff from me, then subscribe, because I'll be releasing more of these analysis-type videos on video games and movies fairly soon. I'm looking to move to a more regular upload schedule, so keep an eye out in the following weeks for more of these videos. But that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.